Hello, here's Lecture C, the third part of my last set of carbohydrate lectures. This is all about dietary fiber, the fibers that free you. All right, so it's so fun, so much fun. All right, so polysaccharides. Up to this point, we've talked about monosaccharides and disaccharides. Polysaccharides, more complex carbohydrates, are long chains of monosaccharide units, all hooked up with this glycosidic linkage that we talked about in the last couple lectures. We have a number of storage polysaccharides. These are polysaccharides that the human body and plants and animals use to store predominantly glucose for quick, easy access. So there are two types of starch, and we see an example right here. So starch, also called amylose, is in all kinds of starchy foods, such as rice, potatoes, bananas. All of them contain starch. So if you eat a raw potato or a green banana or chew on some rice, they're all going to have that kind of dry, flat flavor. That's the flavor of the starch. You can see a picture of the starch on the right, starch granule on the right-hand side. This is made up of glucose in a repeating alpha-1,4 linkage with itself. We call this amylose. So it's just a long chain hooked up with one another. It's like repeating units of the same glucose molecule. When I look at it, it kind of looks to me like this picture of these clowns in a sort of chorus line reminded me of it, because the sugar rings look like little characters holding hands, kicking one of their legs up, and the other is down. The C3 is up and the C2 is down. I don't know. Maybe I've been looking at carbohydrates too much. The second type of starch is called amylopectin, and it's just like amylose, except it's got some branches in it. It's not just linear. The branches have an alpha-1,6 linkage every 25 or 30 residues, and we call this amylopectin. So it's like amylose, but it has this other branched chain that comes off it. So the length of the chain is all alpha-1,4, but then the branch points are alpha-1,6. This is important because it's going to require a different type of debranching enzyme when you are trying to digest this starch. So starch is, in terms of culinary science, starch is great for forming gelatins. You can take a starch and hydrate it, so essentially boil it with water, so that normally when it's dried, the sugar is in this linear chain that kind of forms these coils, and in amylopectin there will be some branches, but it's still like very dense, compacted form, and that's actually pretty hard for your body to digest. When you boil it or cook the starch somehow, the water gets in there and it opens up that structure, softens it, and increases the volume. This is what we call gelatinization, and this is what, for example, happens when you make like fruit preserves. The sugar that's in the fruit gelatinizes and makes the jelly that you're probably familiar with. This enables those sugars to be much more digestible. So the protein the enzyme that we use to break the starch down is called amylase. So amylase breaks down amylose and amylopectin by cutting the amylose or the amylopectin up into intermediate chains of alpha 1,4 linked glucose called dextrins. And then the dextrins are going to get broken down further by amylase into maltose, which is going to have an enzyme called maltase, which cleaves the disaccharide into the glucose. There's got to be a special debranching enzyme to break that alpha 1,6 linkage from amylopectin to get it down into dextrins. Yeah. Amylopectin, so the point I'm making here in the bottom, I think it's a good one. The amylopectin, because it's highly branched, there's a very high surface area available for digestion, so the enzymes can actually get at the saccharide much more readily than it can in amylose. And because of that, it's broken down more quickly and leads to a quicker spike in your blood glucose. Foods that have more amylopectin versus amylose are going to have a higher glycemic index. And in general, that ratio of amylose to amylopectin is going to dictate the relative glycemic index of the food that you're having, which, as I've stated in the past, is related to the insulin reaction that would happen. The higher the glycemic index, the more rapidly the blood sugar goes up, and the larger the spike in insulin. If that happens chronically, that can lead to insulin resistance, which is the precursor to diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is, nobody wants that. All right. So in animals, this is all in vegetables. In animals, animals do the same sort of thing, and instead of amylopectin, they make something called glycogen. Glycogen is used by animals to store glucose. However, it has much more frequent branching, between 8 to 12 glucose units for every chain till it branches. So glycogen is made and stored in two tissues in the body, both the liver and in your muscles. And the glycogen that's in your liver, between the meals that you have, the liver is going to break down that glycogen and release the glucose into the bloodstream, so you can have a steady, constant concentration of glucose in the blood, because glucose is the preferred fuel for the brain. Here this picture on the left-hand side is a picture of glycogen, and all these sugars are attached to a core protein called glycogenin. So a single glycogenin molecule can have as many as 30,000 glucose units attached to it. Pretty huge, actually, in a single granular aggregate of glycogen. All right, so those are the starches. Now I'm going to introduce the concept of soluble and insoluble fiber. Fiber is simply a type of carbohydrate that does not get digested or assimilated. Fiber is not used for fuel by the body. It does, however, attract water. It can form a gel-like consistency in your GI tract and really makes things pass through the GI tract a little more smoothly. It can also act as prebiotics for promoting the kinds of beneficial gut flora that you want to have in your GI microbiome. So the two types of fibers are soluble and insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber is going to dissolve in water, as the name would lead you to believe. And this stuff ferments in the colon into gases and all kinds of physiologically active byproducts. That's a good thing. It also does delay gastric emptying, which in turn can lead to an extended feeling of fullness. So if you're eating a lot of food that has soluble fiber in it, it makes you feel full longer, and because of that, you end up eating less than you might with food that has less fiber and passes through the GI tract more rapidly. And insoluble fiber is not dissolving in water. It's basically just bulk. It's metabolically inert. The body can't do much with it. And however, this kind of insoluble fiber will absorb water as it moves through the digestive tract. And because of that, it enables your feces to be a little bit less compacted and dry. Fun stuff to talk about here. But it eases defecation. And folks, if there's anything that you can do for long-term health, it's make sure you're always making a smooth move. Sorry. Well, okay. Here's some foods that are high in soluble and insoluble fiber. So we have, the grains like barley, oats, beans, prunes, sweet potatoes, figs. Also, flaxseed and chia seed, very high in soluble fiber. If you take those seeds and you soak them in a little bit of water and come back a couple minutes later, you'll notice they're very slimy. That's all the soluble fiber in them. All kinds of cereal grains, whole wheat bread, lentils, strawberries, avocados, apples, all sorts of fruits and vegetables are full of insoluble fiber as well. The fiber really is one of the biggest reasons to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. People get more insoluble fiber in their diets, they tend to, than they do soluble fiber. In the modern diet, people do need to be a little more conscious about their soluble fiber consumption because a lot of people don't get enough. Good way to do it, just keep a couple big bags of chia and flax in the cupboard and just sprinkle them over everything you eat. It's not going to hurt you. In fact, it'll help you quite a bit. All right. So here are some examples of the molecular structure of them. They're some of them are kind of unusual. This one's called arabinoxylin. It's a hemicellulose. So that means it has the basic cellulose structure. This is why we talked about cellobiose and the structure of cellulose in the last lecture. It has that beta-1,4 linkage that the body can't break down. Your body can't digest wood fiber. But it has a number of branches off of it, these alpha-1,3 xylose gluc linkages. So that there's all these xylose molecules, this 5-carbon sugar that gets decorated along the length of the cellulose strand, and this is why we call it hemicellulose. You find this stuff in psyllium husk. Psyllium husk is basically, like Metamucil or something like that. There are a lot of like dietary supplements that old people will eat that have this. Anybody can eat psyllium. It can certainly add a lot of soluble fiber to your diet by having some psyllium. Then there are the fructans. So here's the fructans are a large, pretty complicated family of fructose polymers. So here's one called inulin, and you have a glucose with this chain of beta-1,2 fructose molecules attached to it. And we find this stuff in all kinds of foods like artichokes, asparagus, garlic, onion, white bread, wheat flour, etc., etc. Inulin. Here is some more soluble fiber. So this one's called pectin. It's different than amylopectin. Pectin is a galluronic acid, methoxygalluronic acid, that is in an alpha-1,4 linkage with itself, a long chain of this. So the body is not really metabolizing this stuff. However, this stuff is extremely soluble, and It's a structural heteropolysaccharide that is in the wall of a lot of plants. So, for example, like the skin of grapes or apples have a lot of this stuff in them. Yeah, these galacturonic acid repeats. So, those galluronic acids can be methoxygenated, meaning that there's a methane, a methoxy group on the. It forms an ester, if you remember what an ester is, out of the carboxylic acid. So an ester is the linkage that you find in triglycerides. It forms a methyl ester on the carboxylic acid on the C6 position of the galacturonic acid. And the relative percentage of the methyl esteration of the pectin is it's highly variable, and it's going to lead to these like high versus low methoxy pectins that are in different fruits, and leads to the various gelling properties that pectin has. And so this is why certain fruits produce better jams and jellies than others. All right, I'm not going to go into that too much more. Another soluble fiber is this stuff called xanthan gum. Dang, look at that structure. I'm not going to walk you through that whole structure there. There's all kinds of mannose and glucuronic acids in there. Carbohydrates are a very complicated family of molecules. But this stuff, xanthan gum, is a really powerful thickening agent that's in all kinds of foods that you eat. It's produced by, for example, the bacteria Xanthomonas campestris. X campestris is what gives you the black rot on broccoli and cauliflower. You wouldn't think that, give me some of that stuff, put it in my toothpaste, my Pop-Tarts, and my ice cream. It's also found in lipstick. But that's where it comes from. It's a pentasaccharide repeat unit of glucose, mannose, glucuronic acid in a 2:1 ratio. So pretty sophisticated fiber that you see in a lot of processed foods, xanthan gum. All right, so that's all the soluble fibers. I'm going to talk a little bit about some insoluble fibers. Here is the beta-glucans. Wood. This is a 2x4, cellulose. It's a beta-1,4 linkage that the body doesn't make the enzymes, the beta-glucosidase enzyme. We don't make it to break down that linkage. Wood fiber is just these cellulose chains that are lying side by side and form this really dense network of hydrogen bonds, making the fibers extremely strong. This is why wood fiber is so intense, because it's like the perfect molecular Lego set that all snaps together. Wood fiber, there are cellulose, beta-glucans, in all kinds of food that we eat. We're not just chewing on pine boards. There are cellulose fibers in the walls of all kinds of woody plants that humans eat that provide sort of bulk and insoluble fiber for our digestive tract to work against. That insoluble fiber is really what enables the digestive tract that the muscles in the wall, the muscularis mucosa and the underlying muscle layers of the GI tract, enables it to sort of exercise, so to speak, by working against the insoluble fibers that are in the foods we eat. So there's cellulose, just again to show you how little a difference, but how profound that difference is in the structure of cellulose versus amylose. They're really both just two long chains of glucose where carbon 1 is linked to carbon 4, but it is the difference in the anomeric configuration at that carbon 1, whether it's an alpha versus a beta, that is the difference between a pine board and a potato, the starch that is in amylose. The cellulose that's made from the beta-glucose structure leads to a totally flat structure, whereas amylose leads to these spirals, these curves, these helical molecules. Two very different shapes. Please be aware of how just a simple difference in configuration at one of the carbons in this linkage in two otherwise identical molecules leads to profoundly different properties in the foods that we eat. So here's another example of a beta-glucan. We call it chitin. And chitin is found a number of places, for example, in the cell walls of crustaceans. The difference here, it's basically it's the same beta-1,4 linkage between glucoses, but they're not glucoses. It's actually glucosamine, glicnac, where the C2 hydroxyl has been replaced with this amide molecule, this nitrogen-containing molecule that you see there. That group in the cream-colored box, that's called an amide, and when that's added to glucose, we call the molecule glucosamine, N-acetylglucosamine. N referring to the nitrogen, acetyl referring to the carbonyl group, the C double bond O group. So N-acetylglucosamine. And really, chitin, which is the structural component in the shell of like lobsters or crayfish or something like that, that is a beta-1,4 linkage between glucosamine instead of just glucose. This glucosamine is a really important molecule actually for nutrition in your body. We find glucosamine in a lot of molecules called the glucosaminoglycans, but are these proteins that are in your cartilage and the synovial fluid in your joints. Important molecule. All right, and this nasty bit here, this is lignin. Lignin is a whole class of wicked complex organic polymers that are going to form the cell walls of different vascular plants. So like asparagus, for example, or broccoli, or et cetera, et cetera. These lignins are in the walls of the cell walls of those plants. It's all these like phenolic polymers that get cross-linked with one another. You'll recognize, so when we were talking about kombucha, I talked about tannin. Tannin is a fragment of a particular type of lignin. It's in the lignin family. Foods that contain lignins are carrot, spinach, kiwi, curly kale, radish, asparagus, rhubarb, on and on and on and on. Anything that has sort of a vascular structure to the plant is going to have these lignins in it. And I'm including this in the carbohydrate unit here for fiber because it is a type of fiber for sure. But it does include carbohydrates. You can see here where there's this giant molecule, all these phenolic compounds, these aromatic compounds linked up to one another, but then in sort of the upper middle of that diagram, you can just see in parentheses there's carbohydrate. There can be all kinds of carbohydrate structures that can attach to the molecule at that point and add different properties to the specifics of the lignin that are there. Lignins can be quite good for you, actually. They do add a bulking agent, but they are often prebiotic foods that encourage the growth of bacteria, microflora that are particularly beneficial to humans in your gut. So it's good to get lignans in your diet. One source of lignans, a great source of lignans, is in whole flax seeds or ground flax seeds. A lot of lignin in that. All right. So there are another type of insoluble fiber are these resistant starches. So these are starches. They can either be natural or artificially produced that include different degradation products that aren't getting digested in the small intestine, but then are available to get fermented in the colon. And these resistant starches are super important. They can, having diets high in resistant starch is associated with reduced incidence of colon cancer, different types of cancer. Besides that, it also is stimulatory for the immune system and gives a much reduced glycemic response. So you have less of a spike in blood sugar if you eat a bunch of sugar in conjunction with different resistant starches. So here are just some examples of where you can get these resistant starches. Uncooked oats, the less the oat is cooked or the less it has been, let's say you have whole grain oat groats that are only partially cooked, are great sources of resistant starches. Muesli is made from uncooked oats. White beans, green bananas, barley, all these foods are high in resistant starch. Uncooked oats is really high. So a good thing this is one of the reasons mucilix is such a healthy breakfast option. All right, a little bit of humor to end up on. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Carbohydrates. Gosh, I hate to see you go. Love you. All right, bye.